This is the video for page 419, 2 through 28. Even was your homework, 1 through 27. Odd is what I'm going to do. Okay, so the first thing is square root of 100. Remember, square root means what times itself gives you that number. So what times itself gives you 100? 10. Alright, now when you're talking about fractions and square roots, remember there's a rule that says if the entire fraction is under the square root, you can break it up and put just the numerator under the square root and just the denominator under the square root, because I don't know what the square root of 1/4 is. However, I do know that the square root of 1 is 1, and I do know that the square root of 4 is 2. So that means that the square root of 1/4 is 1/2. When you're talking about square roots and decimals, on this one you've got 3 zeros and then a 1. So when you want to find the square root of it, you're just going to take 2 of those zeros away. And it's, oh, you don't need a square root symbol. I'm not sure what I was doing there. And so the square root of 0.0001 would just be 0.01. Okay. Now, notice the negatives on the outside. So it's okay to do this because the negative's on the outside. If it's on the inside, it would be no solution. So we're going to bring our negative down. What's the square root of 36? It's 6. So your answer is just -6. And that's just because the negative's on the outside. Okay. Now remember, when you're doing the variables, you want to remember that there's a 2 right here, and you always take it back and you divide by it. So you're taking the index back and you're dividing it, and then what happens is you end up with x to the 10 halves, but of course we would not write that, it would just be x to the 5th. Take your index back and divide it. Okay, I'm not sure. I was showing you another way, but I decided to jump ship on that. I don't want to show you that way. I want to do it a different way. There we go. Okay. So, ignore that. Let's start here. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to split it up. Square root of 16 times the square root of y to the 6th. The reason we do that is because we do this 2 different ways. What times what gives me 16? 4. 4 times itself. Now here, remember, if it's not written, it's an index of 2. You bring this back and divide it under your exponent. So then you end up with y to the 6 over 2, which of course we know is y cubed. So your answer is 4y cubed. Alright, use a calculator to approximate each square root to 3 decimal places. So all you're going to do is you're going to get your calculator. It must be scientific. So if you've got your cell phone, you can just turn your cell phone sideways and it becomes scientific. And you're going to hit 7, and then you're going to hit the square root button. And that gives you 2.6457513, but they said 3 decimal places, right? So they only want to here. But remember, if this number is higher than 5, you have to increase this number by 1. So it becomes 2.646. And that's your answer there. Okay, same thing here. You're going to hit 38, and then the square root button, 6.164414, and so on. 3 decimal places. This number is not higher than 5, so you just leave everything alone. And your answer is 6.164. Now remember, you could do this in your head and at least get some kind of an estimation of what your answer would be if you don't have a scientific calculator. Because what are the closest perfect squares to 38? Square root of 36, right? And also, what's next would be square root of 49. You know the square root of 36 is 6. You know the square root of 49 is 7. So it must be somewhere in between here. And 38 is closer to 36, so you know it's probably a low 6.1 or 6.2 or 6.3, something like that. So that's a way you can figure it out in your head if you don't have a calculator on the test. Okay, square root of 200. Now if you have a graphing calculator, you'll actually hit the square root button first. 14.142135. This number is not above 5, so it's just 14.142. Okay, now here we're talking cube roots. So cube roots is what times itself gives me 64. So if you're not sure, go like this. Okay, 2 times 2 times 2, well, that's 8, so it's not that. 3 times 3 times 3, that's 27, so it's not that. 4 times 4 times 4, well, 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4, let's see, oh, is 64. So the cube root of 64 is 4. Alright, just like we did in a previous problem, if it's a fraction under a root, you can break it up, cube root of 1 over the cube root of 8, because between me and you, I don't know what the cube root of 1/8 is. However, I do know that the cube root of 1 is 1, and that the cube root of 8 is 2. So it turns out the cube root of 1/8 is 1/2. Alright, cube root of -1. First off, you're going to freak out because there's a negative under the root. But don't do that. If your index is an odd number, it's okay. Because -1 times -1 times -1 is what? -1 times -1 is +1, right? Times -1, -1 times +1 is -1. Okay? So it's okay. Only if the index is odd. If the index is even, and you have a negative under the square root, it is no solution. Or not a real number, actually. Okay, so just like before, we're going to take our index and we're going to bring it back and divide it. In this case, they gave us our index. We don't have to assume it's a 2. So it becomes x to the 12 over 3, which we know is x to the 4th. Okay, break it up. So it's cube root of -27 and times the cube root of x to the 9th. And you could have even broken this up further if you wanted to and did cube root of -1 times the cube root of 27. But you can leave them together because you guys can figure out what the cube root of -27 is. You know the cube root of 27 is 3, so then this is just cube root of -27 is just -3. Because -3 times -3 times -3, if you multiply these two together, you get +9. And if you multiply it times -3, you get -27. So then the cube root of -27 is -3. When you come over here, you're going to take your index and take it back and divide your exponent by it. So then you end up with x to the 9 over 3, which we know is just x cubed. So your answer is -3x cubed. And that's it. You guys have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow.